This boy was facing the kingdom's guards, and no one was a match for his terrifying power. Those 3 red eyes were all the proof they needed. He was using an evil power that everyone feared. His name Nox Rain Harbor, the son of a rich and very important family. Tired of the battle, a red-haired girl arrived at the scene, completely shocked by what Nox had done. She shouted, asking why he had betrayed everyone and allied himself with evil. Nox paused for a moment and thought about her words. Betrayal? That sounded like a joke to him. In fact, Nox said that they were the ones who betrayed him first. The girl shouted that he was lying, but it was clear from Nox's face that he meant it. It didn't matter, there was no turning back now. The truth is that this is who I really am. A guy who plays games all day, maybe the best player this game has ever seen. The reason I play so much is because my life is miserable. 2 years ago, a doctor discovered that a brain disease would kill me soon. Can you imagine the pain of knowing that your life has a clock ticking so close to the end? In the first days, I was paralyzed. I went through countless hospital treatments, but there was no cure, only painkillers and an empty life. When you have no hope for tomorrow, living today is agonizing. Over time, the pain wasn't the only problem. Look at this. I'm stirring something that looks like tomato sauce. I don't want to fill out these forms when I'm almost out of time. I'll play one more time. This must be my favorite game. In it, you can choose to be a genius in something, and you receive a penalty for it. But one thing I never did was choose to be a genius in 2 things. Look at that. The penalty for choosing 2 genius traits is like a personal insult to me. You get a time limit as a penalty. Isn't that exactly what I am now? A guy with a time limit. Character created. Let's begin. The headaches grew worse. I felt like I was going to faint at that moment. I couldn't. I just wanted to enjoy something good one last time. I managed to create the character, but it seemed that my own time limit had finally run out. A system window said that the synchronization was complete. The white-haired boy from before woke up with a start. This was Nox, but now much younger. The boy felt strange. He was sure he had just fainted in his room, and now he was in a strange place. Only when he went to the mirror did he realize that was not his face. This was Nox, the character from the game he had been playing. Our protagonist had played this game so many times that he remembered everything. Nox Hainabar is one of the 3 Dark Masters of Inner Lunatic. Born into one of the most infamous criminal families and the youngest of 5 siblings, the family had produced geniuses for generations, and Nox was the first without any talent at all. That drove him to ally with demons in search of power and become the greatest disaster in the kingdom, just as we saw at the beginning of the story. But this didn't make sense. It had to be a dream. He couldn't be Nox. While he was panicking, a notification window appeared behind him with his information. His stats looked good, but what was wrong with that energy? Did he have some kind of disease? The traits explained everything. That time limit could only be what he had seen before dying. He didn't remember Nox having any illness when he played. That meant he was like his version from another life, living on borrowed time. Nox then saw that there were unread messages in his system, and the system said, "Hi, Yoan. No, I should call you Nox now." That name the protagonist had almost forgot. It seemed that his memories of his past life were starting to fade. He remembered his parents but couldn't recall where they were or if they were even alive. It seemed that Nox had suddenly received the memories of a person who had lived in another world. Furthermore, he realized that the system knew about his previous life before he came to this place. The system said, "It's been a while," which surprised Nox. The voice of the system said that the last 2 years must have been hard for him and that he at least deserved to come to this place and have the chance to live again. Then it said, "Welcome back." Until now, the protagonist hadn't thought that this was permanent, so this meant he would never return to his old reality. But who cared? What was so good about that life anyway? The system then said that if Nox wanted to learn more about this world, he should enroll in the academy and grow stronger. This was too much for Nox. Now he was supposed to take orders from a system window. Everything was so confusing, but there was no doubt now that Yu had been reborn as the final boss of the game. Inner Lunatic. He was a villain, but did he really need to follow the role of the main villain? Everything seemed incredible. but Knox also had limited time to live. Besides, this was no longer like acting in a game. Knox would not forget who he really was. He decided to follow the main route of the game as a villain, but he would not give up his memories. The important thing was to try to survive at all costs, and if necessary he would become a villain to succeed. In his past life his disease had no cure and would kill him in 2 years, but in this magical world did something like an incurable disease truly exist? When he decided to leave in his room, Knox felt a sharp pain in his wrist, a symptom of his time limit condition. The inflammation in his wrist made it impossible even to open doors, so he couldn't enjoy swinging a sword alone in his room. Out in the corridor, he bumped into a maid. The beautiful girl dropped all the dishes without noticing who was in her way. When she finally realized who it was, she screamed so loudly that everyone heard and feared the worst. The scream startled Knox as well, but he quickly remembered some important things. The girl begged for forgiveness. She was a minor character, so he didn't even remember her name, but everyone feared him because of his strange personality. Normally, Knox would have reacted like this. He would forgive her but warn that next time she would die. Yet that was not how our protagonist usually treated people. Seeing the fear in the eyes of the other servants, he was certain that Knox had never been a kind person. Without saying much, Knox simply stated that he was going to the training hall. No one expected that. The young master had never shown any interest in swordsmanship. What was even more surprising was that Knox ordered the girl to go with him down the hallway. On the way, she feared her master intended to punish her for what had happened earlier. But it was strange that he hadn't said anything yet. The truth was that in Knox's mind, he was only thinking about survival. He needed to find out what was wrong with this body so that he wouldn't become sick as he had in his past life. He got lost in thought along the way. This game had so many layers of complexity and playstyles. The most important thing was to discover whether the genius traits he had chosen really worked and whether he truly possessed both of them, sword and combat. The sword genius trait allowed a person to reach the pinnacle of swordsmanship. The mana genius trait, on the other hand, allowed someone to reach the peak of casting powerful spells. There were many other traits, but those were the two he had chosen. In the training hall, however, Knox's body was so weak that he could not swing a wooden sword more than a few times. What was the point of being a sword genius with a body as frail as that of a malnourished old man? 10 strikes were his limit. He was completely in trouble. This place had many weapons available, as expected from the Hine Harbor family. Several legendary warriors had been born and raised in this family. The head of the family even wielded the tyrant blade of darkness. An unmatched power. Knox lacked health, but time and money would not be a problem for him. His father didn't care how Knox spent his time, since he was the youngest and least talented child of the family. No one had any expectations of him. Just swinging the sword made Knox feel as if he would die a second time. The maid brought water and towels for him. She had never imagined she would see her master working hard at anything. Knox asked her to come closer. The girl feared for her life. Was this it? Was she about to be punished? Knox felt embarrassed. He wasn't the kind of person to do such things. She needed to listen carefully to his instructions. She was to buy everything he requested. She tried to say that it was beyond her means, but Knox asked if she wanted the punishment she had imagined earlier. The girl left thinking that he hadn't changed at all. Our protagonist was interrupted when the family butler Rodwell Diernak arrived suddenly and caught him off guard. This man was his father's right-hand assistant. It made no sense for him to be here. Normally neither he nor Knox's father cared about him, so Knox questioned the reason for the visit. Rodwell brought news from his father. The head of the family wanted Knox to attend dinner that evening. This surprised Knox. He tried to decline the invitation, but Rodwell revealed that the young lady of the Styliner family had come to visit, and that it was important for Knox to be present. Refusing could anger the head of the family. In that case, Knox had no choice and accepted immediately. Rodwell noticed his unusual behavior and questioned Knox's sudden interest in swordsmanship, since he had never practiced before. The young master then spoke in a serious tone. "Rodwell, you are only a butler. Do not dare to overstep your bounds. What I do or do not do is none of your concern." Knox left the room, leaving the butler deep in thought. His firm, cold attitude disappeared as soon as he closed the door. He was worried about something, but his attention soon turned to the girl. He never expected that she would be visiting him. Night fell and it was time for dinner. Someone said, "The idiot actually came." The comment was clearly directed at Nox, but he ignored it. The twins continued talking, asking sarcastically if he still held a grudge against the family. Hartz and Alan kept making remarks, criticizing Nox. They even mentioned that Nox had touched a maid, calling it disgusting. Their arrogant conversation was irritating, but Nox turned a deaf ear. The maids announced that the most important person had arrived. Everyone turned their attention to the patriarch. Yvonne Reen Harbor had come to dinner and brought someone with him. A long-haired, red-headed girl entered and greeted everyone. Stalia von Stillner, dressed elegantly. Yvonne explained that the young lady had requested training for her knights and would be spending some time in the family's territory. The boys were excited by the presence of the young lady, but the girl's gaze seemed to go in only one direction. Nox was the future villain, and this girl was destined to oppose him. He grew nervous, thinking that this was the girl who would one day drive a sword through his chest. He was even more surprised that Nox himself had come to the. At dinner, our protagonist felt embarrassed to be there. The girl had no idea how Nox was treated in this family. They began tasting the kind of food only the wealthy could afford. Throughout the meal, the twins kept glancing at Nox. Then they said it was time to decide who would be the next to enter Elden Academy, and Tevan agreed that a decision should be made soon. Everyone knew that Elden Academy was the most important place in the kingdom, and exactly where Nox needed to go. The system had also told him that he must attend the academy to learn more. The head of the family remarked that only 3 individuals from each family could be sent to the academy. This rule existed to limit the influence of noble families with many children. The Rhine Harbor family had already used 2 of its spots. The first and second sons had been sent to the academy. Tension filled the dining hall when Tevan declared that the family would continue its tradition. Nox then asked if this meant a duel between siblings to decide. His quick question caught Tevan's attention. Tevan announced that in 3 months they would compete for the family's final slot. The twins began mocking Nox, saying that a certain someone would bring shame to the family if chosen. They claimed he had no chance and that it was a waste of time for him even to attempt a duel. Nox surprised them by calmly replying that he looked forward to hearing those words again after they lost to him. This provocation enraged one of the boys. Just the thought of losing to the family's failure was insulting. Nox thought to himself that there was no reason to keep listening to insults in silence. He was not the same person they believed him to be. With confidence he declared that he would be the one chosen for Elden Academy. His bold stance caught Tevan's attention again, and at the same time made the twins furious. Someone else also grew interested. Stalia, with a faint smile, remarked that the young master seemed confident. Her smile looked gentle, yet it sparked a deep fear in Nox. This was the girl who in the game had defeated him at the end of his life. When dinner ended and Rodwell gave his report, Theodor agreed that Nox appeared to have changed overnight, which already seemed absurd. He wondered what had caused such a sudden shift in behavior and briefly considered the possibility of a demon, though he quickly dismissed the idea. Still, what was happening was far more intriguing than he had expected. Theodor asked Rodwell to keep an eye on Nox. Meanwhile, Nox continued his exercise routine, running through the mansion. The maids were shocked and confused, especially since he would be dueling with swords in a month. Nox wondered if he could hear their whispers but was interrupted by the system informing him that his stamina had increased by 0.1 points. That was a very small number, but it mattered because stamina was a major obstacle in his plan. His genius trait could only activate once he had at least 4 points of stamina, which frustrated him. He wished he had started with it, but his frail body prevented it. He needed to raise his stamina by 1.9 points within a month, feeling overwhelmed by the curse that cut his stamina gains in half. All that running had resulted in only 0.1 points, and his illness trait also halved growth. This meant he would need to work 4 times harder. Another problem was that his maximum stamina would be capped at 15 points, though that was a concern for later. Finally, Lone arrived with the items he had ordered the previous day, which impressed Nox. As he examined them, he believed they would help speed up his progress. Having beaten the game 27 times before, he knew exactly what he was doing. He took the items and Lona asked what they were for, looking worried because most of them were dangerous. Nox agreed but said they were only dangerous for someone without knowledge, which confused her. He then grabbed a bottle of poison and began to drink it. The maid panicked and explained that it was poison, but Nox already knew. It was the kind of poison that would give a temporary 50% stamina boost, even though it would kill him in 10 minutes. Lana was about to call for help until he waved her off. Not finished, he proceeded to eat the golden core, which frightened her even more because it would petrify his body. However, the two items together triggered a hidden effect as planned. The core was usually used to maximize defense or give life to an artificial golem, but when combined with the poison, it neutralized the toxin and removed his frailty curse. One negative trait was gone, but Lana was still panicked and asked if he was all right, only to see the exhausted boy start to remove his shirt, which confused her further. Nox stripped off his shirt, making Lona blush furiously as she watched him take another vial and pour spring water over his body. This neutralized the petrification from the golem core. The spring water and the core began to react with each other, creating an oddly pleasant sensation for the boy. Another hidden effect was activated, granting him a temporary blessing of growth that would boost his stamina gains until his stamina reached 5 points. The final touch was the scroll left on the cart. Nox grabbed it and tore it casually, doubling his stamina growth rate. Now the boy with violet eyes had broken the curse of frailty and taken other measures that would make his new stamina growth rate twice that of the average character. He felt proud of himself and clenched his fist, only to be knocked down by the maid, who began to cry and asked if he was all right. Seeing him remove his shirt made her think he had lost his mind under the influence of the poison. She began to calm down when he simply told her to fetch him a towel, but he paused as he looked at her face again. He felt he couldn't yell at Lona when he was feeling so good after breaking the curse. He told the girl he was perfectly fine, but she still wondered if he needed someone to check on him, or maybe just a little rest. However, the light-haired boy explained that he had things to do, which confused the maid until Nox said that what he had to do was run. The sun shone brightly in the sky as Nox could be seen running laps around the courtyard, Lona close behind him with a towel while someone watched from a distance. That observer murmured to herself, wondering what on earth had possessed Nox to accept a duel with his brothers when in her opinion he was nowhere near physically ready. This person was Talia, and her maid Ama quickly scolded her, saying it wasn't proper to speak that way about a member of the family hosting them. Talia didn't care what she said about the family and kept complaining that all Nox ever did was run. It didn't look as though he had any intention of training with a sword, and she had heard that tutors had tried to teach him but were turned away. The red-haired woman was convinced he would be defeated. Still, she couldn't get him out of her mind. Despite her maid's confusion, she decided to go out and speak with him. Talia approached Nox and greeted him, but he was inwardly puzzled as to why she was there with him. He decided to act coldly and asked what she wanted. She frowned at his attitude and assumed he behaved that way because he was impressed by her beauty. She asked the boy if he really believed he could defeat his brothers, complaining that all he did was run, a point with which Lona silently agreed. Talia offered her help, but the boy immediately refused and told her to leave. This shocked her, and she asked if that was how he treated people who offered help. In the background, Lona panicked, believing that was no way to speak to a lady. Talia scoffed and left, leaving the boy confused about what had just happened. Nox felt as if everything was slipping out of control. He checked his stats and saw how talented she was. Her stamina was even higher than the average man's in this world. Even so, she was not on the level of the 3 Supremes or the 4 Sages, but she could still claim a place just below them and would be capable of killing several demons. Her element was fire, and once awakened it would ascend to white fire, giving her the power to burn a corrupted Nox into complete destruction. With that in mind, winning Talia as a friend was not an option. He didn't know how much it might disrupt the story. He only needed to find a way to survive while following the plot. After all, befriending his future killer was pointless. A month later, Talia walked down the hallway, remembering how some people were impressed with her true talent, which matched the reputation of the Stilner family. She didn't feel that way, however, because she felt inferior to her sister. She tightened her grip on her sword as she thought about losing to that woman. Talia wondered whether she would ever be good enough to be a knight. Knights had to be capable of living a frugal life without greed and, from time to time, sacrificing themselves for justice. They also had to master countless swords and techniques. The red-haired girl sighed and thought that Nox must believe running was enough to defeat his brothers, and she was certain he had no chance. The next day, the sun shone over the two brothers who stood in the training hall with everyone including Sela, Theodore's wife, watching. Theodore asked Rodwell how he thought the match would go, and the butler wasn't sure. An announcer explained the purpose of the duel and quickly began the fight, during which Nox's brother immediately raised his sword. When Nox's father asked Rodwell for his prediction, the butler explained that years of training put Alan in the commanding position, and the father agreed. His wife glared angrily, and Rodwell wondered whether Theodore was predicting a different outcome. It was true that Nox had changed, yet Rodwell didn't believe Nox could surpass Alan unless some outrageous circumstance occurred. In Rodwell's days as a knight alongside Lord Leonhard, the art of the sword was ruled by a simple law. Mastery was measured by the time spent with the blade. The only factor that could change this was a talent beyond normal realms, a natural, overwhelming gift, but he didn't believe Nox possessed such a gift. Theodore then spoke, saying it would be unwise to dismiss other possibilities, because as far as anyone knew, any of Theodore's children could possess a gift comparable to the three Supremes. Nox thought about how unlucky he was, even in this world. He remembered that his luck stat should be high, 7 points in fact. After all that running, however, the light-haired boy still hadn't raised his stamina to 4 points. With his growth blessing, Nox had reached 3.8 the day before and was almost at his goal. Even so, Lona was still running after him and asked if he was sure she needed to keep pace. He confirmed it and let slip his real intention. He wanted her to suffer with him. Then he teased that she had one more item to clean, which made her pout. He noted it with amusement and wondered if all this running might also increase her stamina. Checking her stats, he discovered that her number was higher than the average man's. After all his hard work, he was still weaker than a side character. Lona mentioned that the sun was about to set and reminded him of his duel the next day, making him gasp heavily and feel disappointed that he didn't have enough time. When the next day arrived just before the fight, Alan called out to Nox and suggested that he give up, calling him a disgrace to the family. Nox laughed at his brother's behavior, knowing Alan simply wanted to win, and Alan admitted as much, since he hoped to impress Talia. The light-haired boy glanced at the girl before checking Alan's stamina, frowning at the high number and feeling a flicker of worry. The announcer summoned both men and declared that the duel's result could not be challenged, which only deepened Nox's concern. Losing would mean the end of his journey and cost him the chance to discover who had sent the mysterious message, as well as what life beyond his one-year deadline might hold. He gripped his sword firmly as the duel began. Alan immediately made the first move, which Nox dodged, muttering under his breath as he slid back and trembled at the force of the second strike. Nox wondered what to do while Alan laughed and continued to press the attack. Suddenly, the system announced that his stamina had increased, making him smile and murmur to himself. Alan, confused, mocked him and kept attacking. Theodore's wife sneered at the scene, convinced that one of her other sons would attend the academy instead. As the duel continued, Theodore called the display pathetic, which made his wife smile. He added that perhaps they had set their expectations too high. Rodwell suggested stopping the duel for Nox's sake, while Theodore reflected on how talented Alan and Retz were even if neither matched their eldest brother. He wondered if he would have to accept that none of his sons possessed the temperament to dominate the world. Nox refused to yield, and Theodore sighed before rising from his chair to end the duel. But then it happened. Nox felt power surge through him as a new ability activated. Alan asked if his brother had lost, but Nox triggered a skill that seemed to slow time itself. A wise person, whose name Nox couldn't remember, had once said that a genius and an ordinary man experience time differently. That was exactly what Nox felt in that moment. Everything moved in slow motion. Although this didn't instantly perfect his sword control, he was no longer held back by his former limitations. With a swift upward swing of his blade, the duel shifted. Alan's sword was wrenched from his grasp. the sudden motion making the older brother flinch as the outcome became obvious. The weapon clattered to the ground, and Alan clutched his hand, staring as Nox looked down with a cold expression. Yet Nox knew this was not the end. He understood that the skill's effect would last only 5 minutes. He wondered how best to finish everything. With quiet confidence, he told his brother that his pace was too slow and that he would end this quickly. He wanted everyone to come at him at once. Turning to his father, Nox asked for permission to face both of his brothers simultaneously. Fyodor was surprised. While Talia wondered what had gotten into the boy, Fyodor's curiosity was piqued. Despite Sela's protests, he gave his approval. The twins drew their swords as Nox kept a steady smile watching them advance while staying fully on guard. Alan told Retz to corner him, but Retz snapped at him to be quiet. Nox's hidden effect activated again, and he instinctively knew how to block every attack, slipping past their strikes and countering with blows to their shoulders. Talia watched, mouth agape, as Nox once thought the disgrace of the family dominated two of his brothers at once. The twins exchanged glances, but Nox warned them not to take their eyes off their opponent before spinning his blade in a tight arc. Another frenzied exchange followed, and Nox began to feel as if the burden of survival no longer prevented him from truly enjoying the art of swordplay. Everyone stared in shock as the twins gritted their teeth and shouted that this situation was impossible. Within seconds, both Alan and Retz were on the ground. They looked up with expressions of shock and disbelief, realizing they had finally lost the match. That was also when the system informed Nox that his moment of genius effect had ended. Nox turned to the announcer and said he believed the duel was over, and the announcer, with a nervous stammer and a grimace, confirmed it. The winner was Nox. The twins cursed under their breath, their bodies trembling as their arms dropped to their sides and their weapons clattered to the ground. The blades rang against the stone tiles, and Fyodor smiled at his youngest son, who returned the gesture with an exhausted look. Nox bowed to the audience in thanks before heading toward the exit. Before he could leave, Talia hurried over, believing this was her chance to speak with him, and stepped in front of him. The sun was beginning to set, and Nox was panting and twisting slightly, realizing that drops of blood were slipping from his mouth. This confused him at first, but then he understood it was because he had exceeded the time limit. The effect carried a colossal drawback. Using it for more than 5 minutes triggered a debuff. The debuff reduced his remaining lifespan by 2 days and 17 hours. The slow erosion of his life and strength was the worst penalty he could face right now. He now had less than a year to accomplish his goals. Thankfully, the side effect had not manifested in the arena itself, otherwise people might have begun questioning whether he was even fit to attend the academy. A voice called his name. Nox turned to see Talia's worried expression as she asked if he was hurt. She wondered aloud whether he had injured himself during the duel, making him frown and curse softly. Panic tightened his chest. Of all people, why did Talia have to come over and involve herself? Telling Theodore about these side effects would only make things worse. Nox opened his mouth to speak, only for the girl to interrupt, asking if he had really beaten his brothers under such conditions. Her words puzzled him. Talia's cheeks flushed with embarrassment and guilt for misjudging him. She confessed that she had been watching him for a month and had never once seen him train seriously with a sword. The most she had heard was that he had swung a wooden blade a few times on his first day. How then had he defeated his brothers? The question led her to believe Nox was hiding a natural talent. After the duel, she had witnessed the lonely boy coughing blood, his body looking ready to collapse from exhaustion. Talia began to doubt the rumors she had heard, thinking that perhaps they were all misleading. He wiped his chin as the red-haired girl studied him, convinced he was a hard-working swordsman who had fought for his victory. She flinched when he winced, then stepped closer and asked if he was all right. Suddenly, he brushed her hand away with a sharp slap and gave her a cold stare, telling her not to touch his body. He thought about how the last 2 years spent almost entirely on video games had left him unable to socialize normally. It didn't help that she was destined to be his future killer. Talia fidgeted with her hands and explained that she only wanted to apologize. That surprised him, as she admitted she had seriously underestimated his abilities after hearing he had been frail since birth. Now she believed he must have his own reasons for focusing on building stamina. She apologized once more, acknowledging that anyone could make mistakes based on misleading stories. Knox wondered how he should respond, and noticed how modest the girl was, just as she had been in the game, a fact that surprised him, considering she was a duke's daughter. He turned away and asked her for a favor to tell no one about the bleeding she had witnessed. Without hesitation she promised, allowing him to walk away without further worry. But this would not be the last time he saw her. Time passed, and Theodore began to feel his intuition was justified. He asked Rodwell what he thought of Knox. The butler couldn't understand why the boy had been so passive at first, but he believed Knox had reached a stage that none of his brothers had achieved at his age. Theodore shared that opinion but suspected they had only seen a fraction of his son's abilities. He instructed Rodwell to continue keeping a close watch on the boy. Rodwell agreed, and Theodore wondered whether Knox might possess enough talent to inherit as the true heir. Clenching his fist, he told Odwell that the coming report would be of utmost importance. As Theodore himself seemed to have little time left, the butler bowed deeply and promised to do his best. Night fell, and Knox received a notification that he had completed a tutorial mission, though this no longer felt like a game to him despite the lingering system features. His reward for victory was 3 attribute points, and he sighed at the thought that it had taken an entire month just to gain 2 points before this. Even so, he studied his statistics and debated where to allocate them. He ultimately decided to invest all 3 in luck. The simple reason was that during his time playing the game, luck had always proven to be the most important stat. Now he could test its benefits immediately. The system also mentioned that new rewards were available, including a random skill scroll and the chance to cast a unique ability, which stirred genuine excitement within him. Theodore recognized his son's achievements and said that Knox could name any reward he desired. This greatly surprised the boy. He began to sweat, as he didn't remember this happening in the game. Theodore was usually cold and authoritarian, so Knox raised his head and asked for confirmation. His father stood up from his chair and swore upon the history of his black blade that he was telling the truth and would grant whatever Knox wished for. Knox was stunned. The older man continued, explaining that any excessive request would affect his opinion of the boy. Still, he had some faith in Knox. Knox asked for time to think, and the request was granted. He was also given permission to leave the estate whenever he wished, as long as he didn't cause a commotion like last time. The light-haired boy thanked his father, who reminded him of his family name. The next day, everyone gathered outside to say goodbye to Talia and Emma. The red-haired girl blushed as she said farewell, but Knox tried to ignore it even as she smiled at him. Rodwell told the boy that it would be polite to respond. The purple-eyed boy groaned in frustration and turned to say goodbye to the girl as well. He told her that they should meet again when she became a great knight. Talia asked what she needed to do to become one, and he replied that she needed a brave heart that did not fear spiders. The girl blushed in embarrassment and punched him in the stomach, making him regret his choice of words. He should have said wolf instead. Even so, the girl agreed and said that he should keep his neck clean to greet her blade. That sent a chill down his spine, as it was in poor taste considering what he knew about the future. Emma bowed and thanked the boy for everything he had done, including saving Talia. But he said that wasn't his intention and asked them to leave without further delay. The carriage departed, and one of the characters finally left. Knox felt that he was gradually getting used to this new and strange existence. Hey, he might even be starting to enjoy it. Another notification appeared, informing Knox that he had 146 days remaining. He sighed, realizing he couldn't get a break from those reminders. A few days later, Lona asked if he needed a new maid to attend to him at school. Knox murmured thoughtfully, about to recall something, when a knock came at the door. Rodwell entered and told Knox that he was there to introduce the maid who would serve him during his time at the academy. From that day onward, a green-haired girl greeted Knox and introduced herself as Zitri de Lobelia. The boy introduced himself in return, then opened her stats and saw exactly what he expected. She was there to spy on him for Theodore. The system reminded Knox of his impending death, making him sigh as he prepared for the day. Still, he found some comfort in the fact that he was making fast progress despite all the setbacks. Knox looked out at the balcony, knowing that he would soon be heading to the academy. Lana appeared excited about it, and asked if he was nervous. He responded with a question of his own, asking why she seemed so happy about his departure. She made a face and cried, saying she would miss him, but the boy told her to stop pretending. He knew he shouldn't waste time joking around with Lana when that time could be better spent improving his skills. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to handle the programs at school. After all, it was the best academy in the Empire and would certainly be full of talented students. He had to survive among them and become part of the main story to fulfill his destiny as the villain he was meant to be. Knox wondered why everything had to be so complicated. His thoughts were interrupted by another question about the new maid who would attend to him at the school. He murmured thoughtfully before Rodwell entered to greet him and introduced the very same maid Lona had mentioned. The green-haired girl introduced herself again. Knox also introduced himself and checked her stats, realizing that she was there to monitor him for his father. She still maintained the facade of being kind and caring. Theodore was one of the most powerful and cunning men in the game's universe, mainly because his sword skills weren't just due to raw talent. His rise to power was built on his suspicious nature, constantly observing everyone and everything. The maid carried Theodore's expectations upon her shoulders, and she confirmed them without hesitation, a cold look in her eyes. It was said that she was first in line for succession in the Labia family, and in exchange for her service to him, Theodore would support her restoration to that position. Zitri promised to do her best to help Knox, but Theodore didn't like the choice of her words. He glared at her, making her tremble. She bowed again and said she would watch the boy closely and report every detail to Theodore. Then she left, sighing after escaping his intimidating presence. The girl took a deep breath and removed something from her neck, looking at a family photo as she knew she could no longer hesitate. When night fell, Knox thought about how he now had a spy and wondered if she had been chosen to ensure that he wasn't possessed. That was understandable, since demonic possession was quite common in this world. After all, the original game's story began with Knox's downfall when he was possessed by a great demon. Knox believed that no one would discover his true identity, but he was still worried about Zitri. She was not a character in the main story, which Knox saw as a waste, since she was destined to be the next head of the Lobelia household. However, her uncle had murdered her parents and stolen her rightful claim to leadership. The rest of her story was predictable. The girl fled and eventually ended up as a maid for the Linheba family. Although she projected a cheerful attitude, she was desperate inside and would soon give in to despair. If Keenock remembered correctly, the girl would eventually take her own life before the first chapter of the story even began. He wondered what he should do. Should he save a character destined to die, risking altering the story's course? He understood perfectly that such an action could interfere with his plans. The next day, Knox met with both maids to tell them that he would be hunting monsters within the mansion grounds and wanted them to act as his assistants. Lona was shocked and trembled at the idea, pretending to feel ill, but Zitri interrupted and agreed without hesitation. The brown-haired girl sobbed and told Zitri not to agree to everything. Knox knew that fear was a normal reaction, which made Zitri's response all the more interesting. Knox reminded Lona of her lack of vacation days, even though she tried to get out of it. He smiled and mentioned her salary, which made the girl cry and ask what weapon she should bring. The boy chuckled. Zitri told her that she would join them after informing Rodwell. Knox thought about how he needed to focus on earning more days of life, especially now that he was free. As they rode toward the forest, Theodore watched from the window. A few days later, the forest of lost children had become just like any other forest after being conquered. A growl was heard from a gray wolf, which Knox quickly attacked and cut down. He was testing the ring's abilities while absorbing a small fraction of the wolf's life. He sighed in relief when the system informed him that his remaining time had increased by 2 hours. Knox looked around and realized he had probably hunted all the wolves in the forest, and he had only gained those 2 hours from that single session. Still, he considered it a success. His thoughts were interrupted by Zitri, who mentioned that he had been hunting for an hour and asked if he was tired. That soured his good mood, as it reminded him how long it took to hunt without his time-slowing abilities. In reality, he had gained only 1 net hour. Nox grabbed his bottle and drank, wondering what to do since he couldn't hunt monsters 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The bigger problem was that there wasn't an endless supply of monsters. He had practically wiped out the entire population in the forest. At this rate, his grand plan to prolong his life would soon fail. The purple-eyed boy sighed and wondered if there were other monsters nearby, but Zitri told him not to say such things as uninformed people might think he had gone mad. He looked at the setting sun and realized they should return to the mansion. The green-haired girl asked if he wanted her to prepare a bath, which surprised Nox, but he agreed to the suggestion. She smiled happily while Lona frantically asked what she could do as well. She ended up being assigned to tidy up Nox's room. Despite his confusion, the brown-haired girl hurried off to gather supplies while Zitri left the scene. Nox called out to the green-haired girl, wanting to ask her a question. He wondered whom she truly served. That shocked and confused her. Nox looked at her genius assistant trait, knowing that her blade was aimed at him and that he shouldn't try to claim her loyalty for himself. Zitri averted her gaze with a conflicted expression as Nox asked again, making her tremble and hesitate further. He knew the answer she wanted to give and mentioned that he didn't intend to press her anymore. He said that at least she hadn't tried to feed him a lie. Nox stated that he didn't care whom she served. He only cared that she was his servant and that she would use him just as he would use her. The boy walked away, focusing on their mutually beneficial arrangement, which was enough for both of them. When night fell, they returned to the mansion, and Lona was gossiping again, talking about how cruel Nox was for demanding so much of her time. She thought about when she asked why she had to join them and how Nox had seemed like a devil to her when he said there would be no fun without her. Zitri laughed and looked out the window. She remembered being familiar with the rumors about Nox's change of heart, which had reached her even when she was still with her family. She had assumed they were exaggerated since it was rare for someone to undergo such a drastic transformation, but it seemed to be true. After serving him for some time, she learned that he had defeated his two brothers in a single duel and had rightfully earned the privilege of representing the family's name at the academy. Nox was strengthening his position within the family, unlike Zitri, once the legitimate heir to her own family's leadership, now lost in despair. She sighed to herself and recalled the words he had told her that day, how she would use him just as he would use her. That made the green-haired girl stop writing and wonder what he truly meant. A few days later, rumors began circulating within the Linhaba mansion that Zitri had been expelled from the Lobelia family and, as a commoner, no longer deserved to serve the Linhabas. When the girl read the letter, she crumpled it. It claimed that the previous head, Darren de Lobelia, she had been accused of committing the crime of trying to bargain with the family's honor. Since Zitri was associated with Darren, her privileges were also revoked. The light faded from her eyes as she realized she could no longer remain in the mansion. Even among the families that manipulated darkness, the Linahaba family held the greatest authority. Even for service to their half-abandoned son, they would never employ a commoner without a surname. Zitri believed she would soon be dismissed and replaced. Despite this, she still tried to maintain a fake smile and greeted the other maids who had already heard the news and now looked at her with disdain. However, Luna still greeted her as she always did. This left Zitri confused and uncomfortable. She felt her hand being pulled and wondered if it was just Luna being Luna, acting out of friendship. Either way, Zitri believed that such behavior wouldn't do anyone in the mansion any good. As Lona pulled Zitri down the corridor, Nox knew that this was probably the end for her, since Theodore had likely received the same letter. He knew that all the accusations against Zitri's father were false, but he also knew he couldn't intervene. He had no way of predicting the consequences that even the smallest flap of a butterfly's wings could have on the world. Birds flew through the sky while the gray wolves of the forest continued to fall to Nox's blade. Lona shivered, thinking that the boy seemed a bit more frightening that day. The brown-haired girl whispered to herself and to Zitri, mentioning that Nox usually showed some degree of mercy but that it was completely absent today. Zitri murmured thoughtfully and wondered if she should be nervous as she looked at the blood-stained blade he had stabbed into the ground. Nox muttered to himself, wondering if he simply wasn't having the luck he had hoped for. A hidden boss is generated when the monster population in the forest drops below 20% of its usual level. The species and timing of the boss's appearance are random. If Nox had encountered and defeated one, it could have increased his attributes. He sighed and was about to dismiss the thought when he suddenly felt something rushing through the trees, catching his attention. Nox wondered what it was, but he had no time to react as it darted past him at incredible speed. He instantly knew it was the boss. Turning around, he saw that it was an elite giant wasp, a creature he knew was difficult but not impossible to defeat. His thoughts barely had time to form before he heard Zitri's voice calling his name. He turned to see the maid using her own body to shield him from the wasp's attack. It was something he probably could have blocked on his own, making Zitri's action unnecessary. Knowing this, why had she done it? How many people would throw themselves in front of a monster's attack to save someone who had so recently declared that he would use them? Gritting his teeth, Nox activated his time-slowing ability. When Zitri was younger, she had been a very clumsy child, always falling, hurting herself, and then crying, causing great worry for her parents. Her mother and father used to say she was always covered in scrapes and bruises, words that remained true even as she grew older. When Nox had asked the green-haired girl whom she served, Zitri had wondered where her loyalty truly lay. She remembered that horrible moment when a member of her family had murdered her parents and stolen the family name. Once again she questioned where her loyalty really belonged. Nox's words echoed in her mind before everything faded. When she woke up, Nox and Lona were hovering over her with worried expressions. The boy had already defeated the wasp, and he told the green-haired girl to stay with them. He was tense but tried to reassure her that they were taking her back to the mansion. Zitri thought Nox was a liar for saying he would use her. Yet he was genuinely worried about her condition. She wondered why that was just before her vision blurred and her eyes closed. Tears streamed down her face as she noticed a tremor and faint anger in Nox's voice. Back at the mansion, Theodore was reading the letter that had spread the news. Rodwell confirmed its accuracy. Theodore had taken the girl in only to use her as leverage and ultimately absorbed the Lobelia family. That family had been struggling since the death of its previous head, so this could have been an ideal opportunity for Theodore to infiltrate them. For example, he might have claimed that their heir was in danger, using the family's instability as justification. As Zitri's protector, Theodore would have had the perfect excuse to interfere and subjugate the family. However, before anything of the sort could happen, it seemed the girl had already been expelled. The older man then asked Rodwell for his opinion. The butler said that having a servant without a surname would subject Nox to contempt at the academy, so it would be prudent to remove her. Theodore agreed. Suddenly they were interrupted by another servant who rushed in to report that Nox had returned from his hunt, bringing with him Zitri, who had been injured by a monster. In an attempt to save her, Nox had used a very expensive antidote. This surprised Rodwell, who asked if the man meant the mandraken decontaminant, which the servant confirmed. Rodwell felt exhausted by the situation, while Theodore wondered if Nox had begun to develop. He had begun to develop feelings for the young servant. While Theodore believed there would be consequences for such emotions, Lana was standing over Zitri, trying to wake her up. She managed to do so, and the crying girl was overjoyed to see Zitri awake and alive. The green-haired girl wondered what had happened, and worried about Nox's reaction to what she had done. Lana explained that Nox had ordered an antidote to be used, saying it was very effective, and had even threatened the doctor to make sure it was administered. Despite her confusion, Zitri wondered why Nox would use such an expensive item on her after his earlier words. This thought made Zitri try to get out of bed to ask where Nox was. Lana mentioned that he was speaking with Rodwell and remembered that she needed to tell Nox that Zitri had woken up, so she hurried off. The sick girl got out of bed and went to a suitcase, beginning to pack as she thought about how she didn't belong there or anywhere. She grabbed her necklace, opened it to take out the family photo and wrote a note for Nox. It said that her pendant would repay her debt to him and that she would always be grateful. Zitri left the room but stopped when she saw Nox standing there asking where she was going. She froze under his cold gaze as he repeated the question. Before Zitri had been healed, Nox had asked the doctor if he valued a potion vial more than a human life. The doctor tried to explain that the issue was needing permission from Theodore or Rodwell. Nox interrupted, staring at Zitri's body and asking if Rodwell's words truly carried more authority than his own. The doctor felt guilty and said he would personally inform Nox's father about what had been done. The antidote was then administered, and Lona asked if the girl would be all right. The doctor reassured her that the poison had been neutralized, making Lona sigh in relief. Nox turned to leave the room, telling Lona to inform him when Zetri woke up. When Nox went to meet Theodore, his father was surprised, as he hadn't expected an unannounced visit from his son. Theodore seemed to already know the topic of conversation. The boy activated his positive trait, reminding his father that he still owed him a wish. Because of this, Nox stated that his wish was to keep Zetri by his side. His father looked down for a moment, while Nox reflected on his actions and beliefs up to that point. How he had been trying to preserve the story and avoid the butterfly effect. How had he known that her status as a spy was under Theodore's control? None of that mattered anymore. The moment Zetri threw herself in front of him to protect him, it became clear that, although she couldn't answer his question with words, her actions already had. Theodore decided to grant the wish, causing the boy to bow and face his father once more. Nox asked to elaborate on his wish, and was given permission. The system began warning him that his agitation was affecting his stability, but Nox continued, declaring that he would not tolerate anyone toying with his people, be it a lord or even his own father. With a cold look, Nox left the room. This brings us back to the moment when Nox found Zetri preparing to leave, leading him to ask where she was going. The green-haired girl hesitated but admitted that she was leaving because she felt she didn't deserve to stay. Her words were cut off when Nox asked where she thought she was going, given that she was still his assistant and under his service. She mentioned that Nox already knew she had been spying on him for Theodore and that she hadn't been honest. She was confused as to why he continued giving her chances, even when she had deceived him. Her tearful face asked why the boy wasn't discarding her. That made Nox smile at the real Zetri, the one hidden beneath her facade, with the look of someone who was struggling but hadn't given up on finding her way out of the darkness. Nox explained that deceit was a fate shared by all humans. Still, Zetri felt that she had wronged him, which Nox agreed with. He then asked if she planned to leave without correcting those mistakes, which confused her. The purple-eyed boy explained that she would stay and that he didn't care whether she had a family name or not. What mattered to him was her talent and her service. He told her she would redeem herself by continuing her duties at his side. Zetri grew emotional once more and agreed with his words, promising to help him for as long as necessary. Nox smiled at her response. Zetri then decided to answer his earlier question, turning to him and hoping her reply would satisfy him. He smiled back and confirmed that it did. The next day, Lana resumed her gossiping, talking about how Nox had threatened the doctor, only to be caught off guard by Nox's sudden appearance. He was surprised that she didn't even bother denying it anymore. The girl turned to Zetri and reminded her to get some rest, then ran off to handle Zetri's chores for her. Nox sighed at Lana's scatterbrained behavior and turned to Zetri, reminding her of his upcoming departure for the academy in 2 months. She said she hadn't forgotten and had already prepared the essentials, including the basic tools he would need. She hummed thoughtfully, wondering what else she had packed. Nox smiled, realizing that Zetri was no longer pretending something that suited her far better. It was convenient for him as well, as it would also save him effort. Now, he knew that neither of them would betray the other if one were cornered. The boy smiled, believing that this was enough for both of them. Later, Zetri wanted to ask the boy if he was all right, since there were some unfavorable rumors circulating about him. Nox sat down and asked about them, wondering what more there could be, since he was already used to hearing the usual ones. He soon discovered that the rumor was about the reason he hadn't admitted his personal feelings for her. The boy nearly fell out of his chair upon hearing that, wondering why he was even playing the role of Nox. He sighed and apologized to Zetri for the situation, but the green-haired girl said that hadn't been her intention. In fact, she was only worried that such gossip might make Nox uncomfortable. Nox told Zetri there were worse rumors about him, such as how the youngest Leon Huber was said to be a crude and shameless scoundrel. Zetri hesitated and was about to deny it, but he told her to lie to him if she wanted to be dismissed. That made her immediately agree that it was exactly what she had heard. There was another thing she had heard, that he was known to be lecherous around women. She wondered if that was true, making Knox feel even worse about the character he was portraying. Still, he was somewhat relieved that his reputation as a swordsman had improved compared to what it used to be. Nowadays, the rumors were about his careless talent and inflated ego, but he needed to stay in the role of a villain. After all, it was Knox's job to remain the antagonist and help the main characters shine. In the end, he wasn't the hero of the game. He told Zetri that the rumors were enough for now, as he wanted to ask her to find something. She wasn't the only one who could prepare for survival at the academy. She asked what he needed, and Knox knew it wouldn't hurt to let her know his plan given her loyalty. It might even help her perform better in her duties. With that in mind, Knox told her that he wanted to study magic before his enrollment and needed her help. This surprised the green-haired girl because of the imperial law. He knew about it, of course, and wasn't easily intimidated, but he saw it more as letting go of grudges. In any case, she understood and trusted that he had his reasons for the decision. She knew she would start by finding textbooks on the subject, which made Knox smile seeing that she already knew what to do. The boy heard a noise outside and looked out the window, hearing about someone named Gran arriving. This was a man Knox had almost forgotten, and he felt that something important was approaching, a chance to add many days to his life. Knox told Zetri that soon it would be time to leave for a distant place, making her sweat as she realized he was planning another scheme. Later that day, Theodore congratulated Gran on his graduation. This man was Theodore's second eldest son and naturally, one of Knox's brothers. Knox immediately checked Gran's stats and saw that the man was a snob and a debauchee, much like the rumors about Knox himself. However, he was also an opportunist. The reason his character wasn't widely criticized was that Knox had always been the bigger troublemaker in the family, and Gran had found an easier path to graduation through cunning and political manipulation. Each cycle, the academy accepted fewer than 1,000 students, and only half of them would graduate, so there was no way Gran had played fair. Theodore asked if his son had arranged to travel to Surpasses, making the man pause before confirming. His father knew that Gran's main duty was likely to subjugate monsters. Knox knew that Surpasses was a natural territory south of the mansion, with a desert serving as the border between them and the eastern kingdom of Tahalin. It was notoriously infertile and infested with monsters. Gran's first assignment would be to prevent a monster outbreak, which was important for him, as the reward was recognition as an imperial knight. Gran knew about the monster swarms, and Theodore mentioned that defending that territory would prevent further damage to the rest of the empire, ordering his son to defend it well. Gran agreed, but Knox knew the mission was about more than just killing monsters. This side chapter in the game was connected to many others, meaning there was much to gain. Knox caught his brother's attention and asked if he was aware that his presence would benefit from the chapter's rewards. The question surprised Gran, making him think his brother didn't understand what Surpasses was like. But Knox explained what he knew, reminding Gran of the rumors he had heard since arriving. Knox knew about Gran's emerging skill listening as his brother asked if Knox had truly conquered the forest with Zetri's help. Knox confirmed it without hesitation or nervousness, emotions that Gran's detection skill could normally perceive. This was also the secret behind Gran's mastery of manipulation and deceit. Gran also asked about the sparring match in the training hall and Zetri's assistance, both of which Knox confirmed while activating his Heart of Steel ability to counter Gran's detection. His brother smirked and said he had reasons to decline, claiming he would be too busy retrieving Knox's corpse later. Suddenly, Theodore said that Knox could go, surprising Gran. Theodore reassured his elder son and insisted that Knox accompany him. Gran tried to refuse until his father gave him a sharp, warning look. He then looked at Knox was told by Theodore to make good use of his remaining 3 days. Then Theodore left. The boy was surprised by how easy everything had been. Knox wondered if Theodore was planning something, but his thoughts were interrupted when Gran asked what Knox's plans were and if he had lost his mind. Knox replied that he had lost it a long time ago, which made Gran grab him by the collar and warn him to be more cautious, saying it would be a shame if he got hurt before even departing for Surpasses. Suddenly, someone seemed to have dropped a wine bottle. Knox turned around and saw Zetri stumbling behind him. When she tripped and the wine slipped from her hands, Knox was surprised to see it splash onto his clothes. The green-haired girl bowed and apologized for her clumsiness. She suggested that he wait in his room while she fetched a clean shirt for him, which made Gran release the boy. Nox apologized to his brother and said he would take his leave, walking away while mentioning that in 3 days they could continue to reconnect. This made his older brother grit his teeth and clench his fist. As the purple-eyed boy walked down the corridor with Zetri beside him, he thanked the maid for saving him from that conversation. But he couldn't help but sigh at the sheer number of hardships Nox seemed to attract daily. She changed the subject, asking if he was truly certain about going with Gran to Chassers. Nox interrupted her and was about to confirm when he was interrupted himself by a sharp cry from Lona, who ran up to him and asked if he had lost his mind. Nox wondered if the brown-haired girl had forgotten that he was her master, but he sighed and insisted that the decision had already been made. He didn't understand why everyone was making such a fuss about him going to Chassers. He thought it was appropriate. Zetri agreed with Lana and expressed concern for Nox's safety, believing that Chassers was far too dangerous despite his courageous spirit. As thousands of monsters and bandits were known to inhabit the land, the number didn't frighten him. Nox believed it only meant there were more things to hunt and more life for him to steal. He reassured the maids that he had plans to deal with such dangers. He was about to tell Lona and Zetri that both would remain at the mansion while he carried out the campaign alone. However, Zetri interrupted him with a firm tone, declaring that she would not allow it. The green-haired girl reminded him that she was an aide exclusively assigned to his service. Therefore, it was her duty to assist him regardless of his location, which meant she would follow him to Chassers. Nox said that would risk her getting hurt, but she was fully aware of that. She reminded him that he could also get hurt, since they were both heading to a dangerous place, especially because according to Lona, Nox was delicate. Zetri continued, asking if Nox truly believed that his delicacy would allow him to travel unassisted, considering his frequent forgetfulness and lack of experience in handling basic chores like washing clothes. She asked if he really thought a journey without help was practical. The boy ran a hand through his hair, realizing he had forgotten that this was no longer just a game. Such details of life actually mattered. If he were to die, Zetri's position in the mansion would become even more precarious, so allowing her to come with him was truly the safest choice. With that, Nox decided to agree. He told her not to slow him down and suggested that she meet Kaim, his horse. Zetri understood and was already a step ahead. She was about to mention that she already had a good relationship with Kain, which shocked Lona and made her ask how that had happened. The green-haired maid explained that she used the finest sugar cubes, which cost half of her monthly salary, but it had quickly won the horse's friendship. Lona grew jealous, complaining that she always had to feed the horse bad hay. She kept grumbling until Nox flicked her forehead and turned to leave, saying that Lona would continue her usual duties at the castle while Zetri would accompany him on the trip. He told the green-haired girl to prepare well, though he couldn't help but wonder if she was genuinely worried about his safety. A knock on the door was heard, making everyone freeze and look around in confusion. The door opened to reveal Rodwell, who informed Nox that he was being summoned to receive an item. This surprised Nox as his father wanted to give him something. He recalled Theodore's earlier words and wondered if this was related, but he would soon find out. The boy met with Theodore and mentioned the matter of the summons, which Theodore confirmed. He then wondered if his son could truly wield the item in question. Both of them looked at the blade resting in an open box. It was one that Theodore explained had once belonged to the founder of their family. Nox was astonished by the situation, as this was not what he had expected to receive at all. In all the times Nox had played the game, he had never seen or even heard of this sword, and yet even after 27 complete playthroughs, considering himself a professional, there was a sword he had never encountered. He wondered why Theodore was offering it to him, and couldn't quite understand his father's intentions, though it made him think the sword would be important later. Theodore spoke up, aware that the sword appeared humble, interrupting Nox's thoughts. His father assured him that this was the very sword the first head of their family had devoted his entire life to perfecting. As soon as he summoned the dispenser, which looked a little strange in person, Nox flipped the switch and waited, expecting to receive a normal grade scroll since his luck was higher. He nervously swallowed, recalling the colors of the different scrolls. A sphere dropped from the dispenser and burst open in a bright flash, revealing a golden scroll. Thrilled, he opened it immediately. He then used the summoner skill and knew exactly which ability to conjure to help him gather the mansion's hidden treasures. This skill would prove indispensable. Soon, however, Theodor would call his children so the conjuring could wait. The scroll revealed a skill that gave opponents with fewer points a 20% disadvantage against him, reminding Nox why he had loved the game so much. He looked out another window and remembered that Green, the second oldest son, would soon be returning to the mansion. His graduation had been some time ago, and he was coming back from night training. For now, Nox decided to rest. He believed Talia would no longer cause trouble, trusting that she would keep her promise and therefore had no reason to bother him again. The next day, however, Nox was quickly proven wrong when he saw the girl walking toward him. He asked what she wanted and she murmured something unintelligible, forcing him to ask again. This time she asked whether he could teach her how to progress as quickly as he had. Talia wanted to improve as fast as Nox, so she pleaded for his guidance. Nox began to sweat as he walked past her, asking if she truly hadn't figured out the secret after an entire month of watching him. Her face flushed with embarrassment as she tried to deny the accusation. She ran after him, begging him to duel her, or at least to share some of his methods. The purple-eyed boy remembered that Talia longed for her sister's approval and probably sought the same from him after his earlier display. He turned, pretending to think, and told her that before asking others, she should first ask herself what she already possessed. Nox paused, unsure what else to say, but added that she needed to stop comparing herself to others. He then dashed off without another word, leaving the red-haired girl stunned and blushing, wondering if that was truly all he had to offer. Outside the building, he exhaled in relief and glanced back, hoping she wasn't following him. There was no need to have Talia by his side while he went to claim a hidden treasure. That treasure lay in the Linhaba mansion, where his father and brothers awaited his arrival. Nox was amazed when he first saw the family's horse farm in person. Having heard it was among the 3 finest on the continent, Rodwell bowed to Theodore, and his father announced that they were gathered to choose a lifelong companion horse. Nox swallowed hard, realizing the moment had finally come. Among all animals, horses held the most sacred place in both the Alinhaba family tradition and the continent's culture. Anyone aspiring to become a knight or a mage was expected to acquire a horse at an early age and form a bond that would last a lifetime. The academy even offered riding courses, and cavalry warfare was becoming increasingly common as the game progressed. Proper care of a horse also reduced transportation costs, making the choice even more critical. Their father declared that Nox, as the duel's victor, would have the first choice. He had only one chance. Theodore watched carefully as Nox stepped forward, wondering whether his son possessed good judgment. The horses neighed and Nox was struck by the quality of many of them, yet he was searching for one in particular. His gaze swept the field until it landed on a black and gray horse with visible ribs. Without hesitation, he approached and chose it. Shocking his twin brothers, Theodore frowned and suggested that Nox reconsider, as if surprised by the decision. Nox had expected such a reaction. Most people would think he was making a foolish choice. However, by using his keen eye skill, he could see the horse's stats and recognized its exceptional quality. A mount's rank could normally increase only once, but this horse had the potential to become top tier or even better when fully grown. Beyond that, it was an obsidian horse, one of the rarest breeds in the game, prized for strength and beauty. Nox knew Theodore would have claimed the horse himself if he had known its breed. For now it appeared weak, hampered by numerous debuffs and a negative trait that could kill it within days. That flaw might be worse than a crippling illness, but Nox stuck to his choice, confident he knew how to neutralize the problem. Theodore wondered why Nox had chosen that particular horse, suspecting his son saw much of himself in the animal, and had let emotion guide him. Nox's father expressed the hope that the boy would not regret his decision. As the man turned to leave, the twins were surprised to see the clear disappointment on Theodore's face. Rodwell then approached Nox, reminding him that the horse still needed a name. The gray horse rubbed its face against Nox's hand. The light-haired boy looked down, then knelt and chose the name Carl, the same name he had always used in the otherworldly game. It carried deep meaning for him. Carl's new home turned out to be Knox's own room. Humming thoughtfully, Knox knew he needed to keep his next move secret from everyone. Keeping the horse in his room was the best way to do that. The horse stared into his eyes as if to say it could not simply give up on life. That feeling resonated with Knox, as they both clung to any small chance they had. Noticing Lona outside his door, Knox called for her, making a mild threat that caused her to stumble inside. She was shocked that he had discovered her presence, but he brushed it off as obvious. He informed the maid that starting today she would be responsible for the horse. The long-haired girl pouted and turned away with an unhappy expression, clearly irritated because she had been the one to make his bed. Knox ignored her reaction and simply explained that the horse was sick and needed delicate care. Carl's weak condition worried Lona, reminding Knox that his future plan for the horse would terrify most people. He wondered if Lona could handle it. 3 days later, a scream echoed from Knox's room. It was Lona announcing that Carl had died. Knox exhaled at the scene. He had anticipated the horse's death all along. Still, he understood Lona's sadness. She had grown attached to the animal. This outcome, however, was inevitable. Knox had known from the beginning that saving Carl was impossible. He told the girl to stop crying because she was distracting him, a statement that left her completely confused. His explanation that Carl would soon return to them only deepened her bewilderment. Luna began to wonder if the horse's death had affected his sanity. Sighing, Knox instructed her to step back. He then took out a scroll, unrolled it on the floor, and channeled his magical energy into it. The scroll emitted a bright flash, and Luna watched in shock. She could not help but wonder if he was truly using magic. Even though it was against the law, the distractions around him threatened his control over the power. Frustrated, Knox shouted at her, asking if she wanted to see Carl die a second time. If that was not her goal, he demanded her silence. She obeyed immediately. Knox needed intense concentration because he still could not fully control his mana, and his mana sensitivity trait was dormant. Moreover, the Empire's law was strict. Only members of the royal family were allowed to use their magical energy before the age of 15. This rule gave the royals a major advantage in magical training, often leading them to greater achievements. Since Knox was not of royal blood, his only option was to release as much magical energy as he could summon. He felt a pulsing sensation in his hands and wondered if this was the true feeling of wielding magic. Smiling as he prepared his unique skill, Conjure, he knew there was no room for error. He was about to use dark magic when the image of a skeletal hand holding a book flashed before his eyes. The system informed him that he could now summon Carl back as an undead pet and asked if he wished to proceed. He agreed without a second thought. A glow enveloped the horse, lying before the open book. Knox remembered that the undead in the game shared two common traits. They were resurrected with dark magic and shadow-type energy, and they retained their consciousness after death, while gaining enhanced strength and absolute loyalty to their master. However, there was a complication. Only one family, the Marbos family, possessed the power to create such beings, as they were masters of the darkness element. They were similar to the Linhabas, but instead of knights they were dark mages. Knox wondered if characters outside that family could ever acquire these abilities. The answer had always been a firm no unless one possessed the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead, which he had just invoked. Shadowy hands burst from the ground and wrapped around Carl as black liquid dripped from Knox's mouth. Lona watched in horrified shock, but he ordered her to remain silent, needing more time to channel his energy. He groaned with the effort, coughing up more blood as his magical energy drained. Fortunately, his efforts paid off. He looked up to see the horse rise and neigh loudly. Knox had succeeded. He gazed at Carl, now his undead pet, and saw a new gleam in the horse's eyes. Panting from exhaustion but thrilled to have accomplished something so profound, Knox stood as Lona, tears of worry still in her eyes, watched him call to Carl. The undead horse trotted to his side. Checking Carl's stats, Knox was pleased to see that the negative trait had vanished, replaced by the expected enhancements. He informed Knox told the horse that from this day forward he would be its master. Carl seemed to make a satisfied sound as Knox stroked him. Both boy and horse were startled when Lana suddenly hugged them. Knox was confused as she began to cry. overwhelmed with worry after seeing him cough blood and already distressed about Carl. The horse snorted and pulled away from Lona, apparently offended, which was surprising since she had been the one caring for him. While she started scolding the horse, Knox's thoughts shifted to his next objective, the search for the mansion's hidden treasure. A few nights later, Knox left his room, passed through the stables and headed toward a forest. He carried a few items, relieved to find the paths exactly as he remembered from the game. He tucked the items away, thinking about the second hidden treasure located in the woods. Failing to find it would mean he would not die. It was the key to slowing the progress of the illness that limited his life. A rustling in the bushes put him on high alert, but he quickly told himself he was just nervous. Still, he could not shake the feeling that this was no longer just a game. He looked at a wooden sign warning people to stay away. It declared this was the Forest of Lost Children, a place where people wandered and died. Knox entered the forest, and the system notified him that failing to complete this stage would result in his death. A breeze stirred the leaves as the light-haired boy moved through the tall grass. He remembered the details of this forest well. It was strictly forbidden because of its total darkness and the thick fog that could disorient even the most skilled individuals. The name was fitting. Anyone who entered was practically lost. It was important to remember that it was the Forest of Children Lost. This meant adult characters gained no reward for clearing the monsters inside, and the creatures became several times more hostile toward adults. Knox had learned that lesson the hard way while playing. In terms of difficulty, the forest ranked at least 2.5 out of 5 stars. Back in his old world, he hadn't cared about the reward, but now it was exactly what a dying man needed. He ventured deeper and lit a torch, watching the flame flicker brightly. The trick to navigating the forest was to watch the direction of the smoke and then walk the opposite way. Knox was about to do exactly that when he decided to deal with something else first. He called out to the person hiding in the bushes. Silence was the only answer. Sighing, the boy drew his blade and slashed through the brush, followed by a scream that echoed through the forest. Before this, Tia had been surprised that Knox was unimpressed by her beauty. The situation had left her confused. Emma had begged the red-haired girl to stop following Knox, worried she would be blamed. Tia, however, was not concerned. Later that night, Emma walked the halls, still uneasy, knowing that Talia possessed talents much like her sisters. With a sigh, Emma went to check on the red-haired girl, only to find her room empty. Panic and confusion seized the maid. Before she could process what had happened or wake the household, the leaves in the forest rustled again. Talia sat on the ground with an embarrassed expression as Knox stared at her in perplexity. She greeted him and was about to explain her presence when another rustle made him pull her behind him, just as something emerged from the bushes. It was a gray wolf. Talia was shocked to find gray wolves living in a forest so close to the mansion. She swallowed hard, realizing she had no real weapon to defend herself. The wolf growled and stepped closer before letting out a howl, undoubtedly calling its pack. More howls answered in the distance. The wolf growled again, but Knox merely smiled, lunging forward and slashing the creature across the chest. A second cut to the neck brought the wolf crashing to the ground, dead. The girl stared in astonishment at the boy, now splattered with blood on his face and clothes. He again asked why she was following him, which made Talia blush and invent an obvious lie. Knox had no patience for it, and threatened to leave her there if she didn't tell the truth. His bluntness shocked her and she grabbed his wrist, starting a halting explanation. It wasn't a complete lie, but she wasn't getting to the point. Knox sighed inwardly, realizing that Talia was overestimating his abilities. Surprisingly, he felt no resentment toward her. He was also amazed that a girl could be so reckless as to follow someone into the forest in the middle of the night. Still, he decided to let her stay, since he couldn't simply abandon a main character in the woods. However, he made one thing clear: he was not helping her. He was only keeping her alive to avoid a feud between their families. Talia felt a pang of guilt, and Knox hoped she had learned her lesson, but the girl kept talking, trying to thank him, something that caught him off guard. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of more wolves. They growled loudly as they began to circle the pair. Knox still held the torch, as a chill ran down Talia's spine. Suddenly Nox shoved her aside, telling her to stay behind him. He handed her the torch, explaining she would only get in the way of his sword if she tried to fight. Things were not going as planned, so Nox needed to focus. This forest was part of the prologue, not the main story. That meant there would be no stage boss. One less thing to worry about. However, there would still be an elite monster, just one step below a boss, and it was likely to be an elite gray wolf. The wolves continued to growl before attacking. Nox knew that simply identifying the threat would not make things any easier. He slashed at the wolves that approached, feeling as if he were constantly living on the edge. Another wolf leapt at him from above. It was time to set aside his pride and face the challenge, just as he used to do in the other world. Gripping his sword tightly, he tried to remember his mantra. Once it came to him, he cut down more wolves and exhaled in relief. Talia watched in admiration, convinced that Nox was not even fighting at full strength and wondering if he had hunted wolves before. His earlier words echoed in her mind, making her think he considered her sword skills inadequate. The wolves kept howling while Nox held his ground, knowing what was coming. He heard a rustle in the grass as a much larger animal emerged into the clearing. The elite gray wolf. Back at the mansion, servants carrying torches searched for Talia. They found footprints leading into the forest, which they assumed belonged to Nox and Talia. A wave of fear swept over the servants who knew the horrors of that place. Emma collapsed in worry, insisting that they had to follow. Rodwell immediately stopped her, saying they could not, which confused the maid. He explained that this was a forest even the Lianba family had never conquered. For the family, the forest was a symbol of shame. Admitting that an area within their own property remained unexplored was like publicly declaring their incompetence. What the Lianabas did not know was that only children who had not yet reached adulthood could truly succeed in the forest. Rodwell wondered why Nox had entered, noting the cautious nature of the footsteps which showed no signs of struggle or kidnapping. That meant Nox had walked into the forest willingly. He clenched his fists, no longer able to deny that Nox had truly changed. His old self was gone. He told the others there was only one way for them to return. Nox would have to find his own way back. Emma, tears still in her eyes, listened to the distant howls of the wolves, which only heightened her fear. She felt as though she had allowed Talia to walk to her death. The red-haired girl seemed to draw a dagger from her ankle, and Nox quickly noticed that fear had not destroyed her focus. He reminded her to stay out of the fight to conserve her strength, and to run as soon as they were attacked. Nox knew this was not the time for a life-or-death lecture with an elite gray wolf nearby, but he wanted the girl to remain alert and was glad she stayed vigilant. Still, he could not trust her to guard his back yet. Because of that, Nox activated his ability to slow time, intending to defeat the elite wolf with a single strike. The wolf seemed to mock him as it crouched, making Nox realize its plan. At that moment the other wolves charged. Nox dealt with them easily, but they suddenly stopped, which puzzled him. Then he saw the elite wolf rise and growl. Several wolves ran forward and leapt toward him. He tried to focus on a few, but he could not counter all four at once. One stayed behind him, growling as it lunged. The light-haired boy spun around just in time to see the wolf stabbed in the throat with a dagger. He realized the strike came from Talia, who shouted for him to be careful. He looked up and saw the red-haired girl in the trees. She knew he had told her to run, but she simply could not. The boy was surprised to see that Talia was truly helping him. Talia called out to the light-haired boy, asking if he was all right and hoping he had not been hurt in the near attack. Nox was startled by the girl's determination, but his thoughts were interrupted by a growl. He turned and cut down two more wolves. He assured her he was fine, which made her sigh in relief, though he could not help feeling that he must look pathetic. Nox exhaled, then realized his body was trembling. The side effects of using his abilities for too long were already showing. It was frustrating, especially at such a critical moment, because something was now rising from the ground. It was the elite wolf. The boy with violet eyes smiled, tightening his grip on his sword as he watched the elite wolf circle him. Suddenly it lunged, surprising Nox as it rushed past and darted back into the forest, leaving him completely confused. Silence settled over the clearing as the boy tried to understand what had just happened, until he heard a rustle. He turned, but it was too late. The elite wolf streaked past him again, leaving a deep gash in his side. Talia looked on in alarm, calling out to Nox as the wolf retreated once more into the forest, leaving the boy silent as he clutched his shoulder. He clenched his teeth, sensing that this attack in the forest had gone entirely wrong, even though it had been his own decision to enter. It was his own doing. It was a logical feeling, as real life was very different from a video game. The boy frantically looked around. Silence continued as Nox considered how the monster was coordinating attacks with its pack and now using the environment to its advantage. He heard the leaves rustle before advancing again. Nox identified its location and immediately swung his sword at the monster. However, the wolf suddenly stopped, preventing Nox from landing a hit. He was surprised when the snarling canine attacked again. The light-haired boy realized that the wolf was waiting for him to make a big move that would expose his own weak point. His hands gripped the sword and he ground his teeth, groaning until blood began to trickle from his mouth, increasing his frustration. The wolf leapt at him and everything seemed to move in slow motion. Nox's life flashed before his eyes. He thought about how he had already completed this game several times, yet he had been overconfident in a situation like this. Nox wondered if he was truly stupid enough to think he could do anything. He knew this was not how he had imagined his death. The boy closed his eyes tightly, preparing for a second end, but it never came. A sound cut through the air and the surprised boy opened his eyes to see the dog crying with a dagger embedded in its eye. He realized that if he had weak points to expose, the elite gray wolf did too, and the only person who could have revealed them was not him. Nox gripped his sword and let out a battle cry, plunging the blade into the wolf's stomach. Blood spattered everywhere until the beast collapsed to the ground. The boy also fell, completely exhausted from the side effects of his abilities. He gasped as Talia screamed in concern, realizing that the other wolves were still alive. Despite this, his fears eased slightly when he saw the remaining wolves whimpering and retreating. The red-haired girl jumped from the trees and ran to the boy, asking if he was okay. He reassured her while wiping the blood from his mouth and was about to say that he owed her a lot, but stopped himself, remembering that she was technically an enemy, the very person destined to kill him in the future. Nox stepped back and reassured her again, though his tone was colder this time as the elite wolf's bite still hurt. The boy stood and said it was only a superficial wound, which brought some relief to the girl. Then she turned her head and saw a spider crawling on her shoulder. The sight of the arachnid sent a chill down her spine, making her scream. The boy was confused, turning to see if more monsters had appeared. She grabbed him, tears streaming, leaving him even more bewildered. Talia trembled and muttered about the spider to herself and Nox. She looked again, screamed once more and made the boy stagger. Nox sighed and laughed at the fact that the red-haired girl was afraid of spiders. He moved her aside, saying that she should not have followed him into a forest if she was so afraid. Talia asked if he really was not scared of them, but Nox responded by asking if any knight would fear spiders. This embarrassed the girl and she tried to defend herself. With her out of the way, he finally felt he could breathe, but then Nox began groaning again, which worried Talia. He tried to tell her it was none of her concern. Nox thought about how the girl had not interfered during the fight and had even saved his life in a way. He felt incredibly grateful, even if he would never directly admit it to her. But now Nox needed to find a way out, as his objective had been achieved. The sun began to rise, and Talia continued crying, feeling that everything was her fault. Rodwell stood there, wondering if things had gone terribly wrong. Atelia's disappearance could easily escalate into a dispute between their families, and that would not be the only consequence. There were other reports of children from the mansion disappearing into the forest, which would make the family's incompetence a matter of public debate. Rodwell's attention was drawn to the forest, where the mist was beginning to dissipate. Everyone was surprised, and the commissioner's mouth fell open in astonishment. Emma ran to Rodwell to ask if this meant they had been defeated, and Rodwell agreed. Their only hope was becoming reality. Emma's eyes filled with tears of hope as she saw Nox and Talia emerging from the forest. The other servants began to wonder if Nox had truly succeeded. Rodwell could not organize his thoughts, but one thing became clear: the succession of the Lee family leadership would not be peaceful. Nox asked why everyone was gathered there, and ran to embrace Talia, tears still streaming down his face. The commissioner explained the situation, and Knox seemed surprised that everyone was so concerned about the family's black sheep disappearing. Then the boy turned to see Emma grab Talia, lifting the girl with an angry expression and saying that she would recite the codes of conduct. Talia panicked and tried to apologizing, but Emma continued, saying that the head of the Steiner family would give the lesson. Knox was surprised to see that the maid was so strong. Emma expressed her gratitude to Knox, to which the boy replied that he had not intended for Talia to follow him, but added that she had proven herself capable and did not deserve a punishment that was too harsh. This caught Talia off guard. Later they returned to the mansion, where Knox began to remove his blood-stained clothes. He was still surprised by the crowd waiting for him, but none of that mattered now. He had finally obtained the hidden treasure he had been searching for. It was a ring that slightly increased his stats, but also had a special effect. It allowed the wearer to absorb small fractions of an opponent's lifespan upon defeating them. The stronger the opponent, the more life the wearer could take. This was the only artifact of its kind. Of course, the ring alone could not save him from death. It was not as if he could prolong his life indefinitely, as the description specified that it only absorbed small amounts. Still, it gave him hope. He put it on knowing it was better than nothing. He could feel his stats rising slightly. He called for Lona knowing she was outside. The maid asked if he could see through things, to which he replied, maybe. This made Lona embarrassed, thinking he might see beneath her clothes. Knox lightly tapped her head and the girl wondered if he had grown stronger as he rubbed the spot. Changing the subject, he told her that they would have an arm wrestling match. She seemed confident as she agreed to his terms. He would increase her salary if she won and decrease it if she lost. As they counted down, Knox slammed his arm down the instant they began. She was in disbelief and begged the boy not to lower her salary, but he mentioned having heard from a certain maid that he was the family's famous troublemaker. He smiled at her while Lona continued pleading. Suddenly Knox's weakness activated, causing his wrist to fracture and giving him a chill. Knox was disappointed and told Lona to just bring him some ice and a towel. He sighed, trying to focus on the joy of winning the ring. He knew he should prioritize rest, but he hated being hit by a combination of ailments. Elsewhere it seemed someone was trying to remember Knox's face, knowing his name from another world. Cow and the Black Fire Ring, the two hidden treasures of the Leon Raba mansion. The sun shone over the mansion and Knox realized that even with both treasures in his possession, he was condemned to months of confinement, with no chance to use them. Knox looked at the plaque inside, opening it and muttering to himself. He felt he should not face any consequences, considering he had conquered the forest that no one else dared to enter. He asked Lona if she agreed, turning to the maid, who seemed excited to say anything. Knox remembered that his salary could also be reduced for not keeping her happy. She quickly and nervously agreed, while the boy collapsed on the sofa. It was frustrating for him. He was beginning to feel comfortable with his new life, and seeing Carl grow brought him great joy. This confinement could not continue. It was not just about these things. His death was approaching rapidly, and he knew he would die before 6 months had passed. This was something he knew thanks to a system notification. These alerts seemed more concerned with his remaining time than he was himself. His body trembled before he got up from the chair and told Lona that he would speak to his father to regain his freedom. She was about to tell him his bath was ready but was interrupted by a knock. The door opened, revealing Rodwell, who greeted him with a bow. The boy was surprised both by the butler's presence and the message that Theodore wanted to speak with him. Corpses of knights and monsters were scattered across the ground as Theodore recalled the fateful night, now known in history as the night of the massacre. Monsters had screamed, advancing toward the man, who held his dark sword before cutting down the enemies in his path. Images of advancing demons, piles of human bodies and pure carnage flashed through his mind, making him feel more like a plague than a battle. Theodore looked toward the horizon, sensing a heavy dark energy around him. This reminded him that he needed one of his children to inherit his sword, the Conqueror. Someone with average potential would not be enough. The man wondered who would be the right choice, who possessed talent strong enough to one day surpass him. A knock resounded, and Rodwell informed Theodore that Knox was on his way, to which Theodore acknowledged. He thought about how even he had failed to solve the forest's mystery and that Nox's achievement deserved recognition and a reward. Unsurprisingly, the Omebagros had interfered and blocked the acknowledgement. It was difficult for them to believe that Nox had changed, and they demanded a full investigation to confirm that the forest had truly been conquered. This was something even Theodore could not ignore, as an investigation would be necessary in any case. Nox entered the room and greeted his father. Theodore mentioned the boy's past wrongdoings, likely referring to the time before his reincarnation, of which Nox was fully aware. Regardless, Nox asked how he could demonstrate his ability to handle the sword, to which his father simply told him to hold it. The boy took it and lifted it, only to suddenly feel a heavy and dark aura emanating from the blade. He realized that it was absorbing his magical energy, and he noticed that the color of the blade had also begun to change. This made Theodore stand up when he saw his son feeling the flow of energy. The boy nodded, and his father explained that the sword absorbed the wielder's magic before multiplying it several times. This surprised Nox, and he asked if it was a blade not to be handled lightly. He was interrupted by the sword absorbing his magical energy once again. The system warned the boy that his magical energy was being depleted at an alarming rate, negatively affecting his actions, which worried him. Theodore spoke again, saying that if Nox wanted to be the next owner of the sword, he had to hold it for a full 10 minutes. That was something Nox could hardly imagine. Theodore said that the sword was called Stormbringer. The sword was currently under containment, and the system informed Nox that it would absorb magical power while converting it into attribute points and also emit amplified magical power. This information wasn't helping Nox much at the moment, as he was trembling from how negatively it was affecting him. Nox soon realized that his magical energy had been completely drained. Then the sword decided to use his life as an alternative fuel source. This confused him, as the system warned that his remaining lifespan was rapidly decreasing, which deeply worried the boy. He believed he needed to let go of the sword for his own safety. However, Nox noticed that his hands wouldn't release the sword, no matter how hard he tried. This frustrated him, as he was upset about the situation he was trapped in. Theodore observed, thinking about how Stormbringer was quite a wicked weapon, one that would lead its wielder to destruction in exchange for its power. The fame and legacy of their family came from that very blade, yet none of the descendants of its first owner had ever managed to master it. Most who tried had fainted the moment they touched it, something Theodore had witnessed many times. Therefore, if anyone could last 10 minutes on their first attempt, it would be a true achievement. Even Theodore himself had only managed to last an hour after years of training with it. Still, something in him pushed him to test the 14-year-old boy who had not yet developed his magic. When Nox saved the dying young maid, it became clear that amid all the recent disturbances, Nox was at the center of it, which could hardly be a coincidence. The boy was growing, and his potential was beginning to reveal itself. Theodore wondered if the boy would surpass his expectations as he watched Nox fall to his knees, still holding the blade. Perhaps Nox's talents could rival those of the three Supremes. The mere thought was reason enough for Theodore to test him. Would he be able to endure the required time? Theodore believed that Nox would become the most powerful leader in the history of the Lion Rubbers. Nox pointed the blade toward the ground as cracks began to form beneath him, panting heavily. While Theodore believed that his son had the potential to surpass him, the boy gritted his teeth and turned toward the older man, who mentioned that he suspected Nox was hiding great power within himself. Nox was about to ask what was happening when his father walked past him, saying that the sword now belonged to Nox, but that didn't make Nox happy, considering that he had lost much of his lifespan. 3 days later, it was time to depart for Chatos. Zatre felt pleased, mentioning how kind it was of Theodore to give the boy a bag to store all his belongings. Even so, Nox was still unhappy, which confused Zatre, as she thought he had been excited about the expedition, yet he seemed so upset. He sighed and wondered if he should feel grateful to his father for the bag after the sword had consumed most of his remaining life. He looked ahead at Gran, who was talking with the others. Nox knew that his brother had taken a small fortune and exaggerated his burden in joining them, but Nox didn't care. He would use his brother as well. Shouts were heard as trouble arose regarding the route to Chatos. This angered Gran, who was irritated with a man named Ron hired by Gran to guide them. The men argued and Zetri looked at Nox, who called the guides fools for leading them the wrong way. He then went to his brother to discuss the problem. Gran tried to wave him off, but Nox continued speaking, which seemed to annoy Gran further. Nox asked if it didn't concern him that he might be able to find the right path for them. Gran didn't believe his brother thought he could act as a guide. Nox suggested using his talent for just one day, as many of their subordinates had said he possessed a remarkable talent for finding paths. Gran had his doubts but was still surprised by the claim, while Zetri looked equally astonished, though her expression was due to how casually Nox was lying without hesitation. A late arrival could cause serious problems, but if Nox failed to do what he had claimed in front of everyone, this was supposed to weaken Nox's spirit and bring satisfaction to Gran. After all, risking a slightly longer journey wasn't the worst choice. So Gran decided to allow it, which made Nox smile and tell everyone to follow him. Later that day, a camp was set up for everyone to rest during the night. Gran complained to his guides about how Nox had managed to find the path so quickly, especially since they were in a territory where even the most experienced guides had trouble navigating. The older brother continued his furious complaints, while Nox silently observed from a distance, knowing it was easy for him since he already knew the paths from his previous experience in games. Territories was a strategic location he had visited hundreds of times before. Zetri, however, wanted to ask the boy directly how he managed to find the way so quickly. Nox claimed that the terrain had helped him. She was confused until she noticed claw marks left by a demonic bear, a type of monster native to the southern region, often found near the southern borders of Cheritors. This information surprised the green-haired girl but also worried her about the possibility of an attack. Nox reassured her, saying that bears were afraid of fire. Those nearby whispered among themselves about how different Nox was and how he might even surpass his well-educated brother from the academy. This made Gran even more irritated, and he asked one of the servants to confirm Nox's success against the twins, which Schutz confirmed. With that, Gran wanted to witness the boy's abilities for himself. Schutz said there was a perfect item to help with that, pulling out a bag that made Gran laugh wickedly as he looked toward Nox. Later that night, everyone went to sleep, and even the guards seemed drowsy. A monster rustled through the trees toward the camp, something Nox had already expected. He already had the blade in his hand before standing up and telling Zetri not to leave the tent. The leaves rustled in the wind as Nox stepped outside and faced 4 monsters he recognized as ogres. Although he knew the camp should have been protected from monsters, the boy looked toward what he suspected had drawn them there. The mud scattered around must have been mixed with ogre pheromones, attracting the creatures, whose senses were heightened during mating season. They wouldn't have been able to resist. Nox knew the trap must have been Gran's idea to put him in danger, but he wasn't alarmed by their presence. He even greeted the ogres as he drew Stormbringer. The monsters growled before charging at the boy, who blocked their attack, leaped into the air and drove his blade into the back of one of them. The other ogres swung their clubs at him, but he moved faster, slicing through them as he passed. Their screams of pain echoed as Nox looked down at the dark sword, realizing that all his worries about it draining him had been wrong. He smiled before continuing the slaughter, feeling as if the sword could read his mind and move ahead of his thoughts. Only one ogre remained, staggering, dropping its weapon and trying to flee. However, Nox whistled for Cal, who transformed into his true form. Nox mounted him and galloped toward the ogre, cutting it down in one swift strike. He let out a sigh of relief upon seeing that his remaining lifespan had increased by 1 day and 9 hours. His thoughts were interrupted when Zetera peeked out and asked if everything was all right. He reminded her of his earlier request, but she ignored his words, shocked at the sight of the ogre's corpses. She asked if she should call the night patrol. Nox said it wasn't necessary. The ogres had been invited. This confused her until he explained that it had been Gran's idea to pit the ogres against them, which was why Gran's tent was so far away. Zetra asked if that meant Gran was plotting to restrain Nox, which the boy confirmed without hesitation. He explained that he likely posed a potential obstacle to Gran's pursuit of leadership of the house. Thus, Gran probably wanted to test Nox's abilities. Such cowardly schemes were likely the only way he could gain a decisive advantage over Garin, his older brother, who was a superior swordsman. But Gran was about to learn that such tricks didn't work on Nox. The boy picked up a vial and asked Cetra if she knew what provoked ogres even more. He then squeezed ogre blood into it, explaining that it was what enraged them. Just like humans, ogres couldn't let go of vengeance when their kin were killed. Owls hooted through the night as Gran was awakened by the humming of crystal orbs. This confused him since they only made that sound in the presence of a monster's magical energy. He wondered what was happening until he heard pounding noises as his servants rushed in to tell him they were under attack. Gran ran out of his tent and saw swarms of ogres. A chill ran down his spine as he hoped they wouldn't target him. The sun finally rose as everyone fought off the monsters and began cleaning up the aftermath. Gran was yelling and kicking in frustration for possibly having made a mistake, though even his servant looked bewildered. Meanwhile, Nox appeared completely unbothered by the situation and simply asked Zetra if she agreed that it was a beautiful morning. She agreed and mentioned that breakfast was ready, though she also told Nox that the maids hadn't yet. The maids did not sit with their masters, but Nox said that this was not the case now, as there were far worse situations, such as the swarms of ogres that had attacked Gran's tent. This made Zetri glance at him with mild disdain as she sighed, remembering the audacity of the person she served. Nox laughed and began to eat while watching the tents being dismantled, noticing that they weren't throwing away the blood-stained ones. The girl asked what they were going to do about it, and Nox pretended not to know. Zetra explained that the bloodstains would attract more ogres, but that was something Nox already knew, and it was exactly what he wanted. However, he didn't tell her that to avoid her complaints. This was the perfect opportunity to gain more lifespan. After finishing his breakfast, he realized that he would soon need more ogres. In the distance, Nox heard a loud crash and told the green-haired girl that they should rejoin the others. Meanwhile, a lone ogre wandered through the forest until it seemed to sense something. It turned around in confusion before being suddenly overpowered and killed within seconds. It was already the second day of their journey, and Nox had successfully mapped the area's topography, which made him feel relieved. Given the journey's progress, Gran asked Nox about his plan concerning the ogres that were chasing them, wondering if it was possible to shake them off. Nox confirmed that it was. He said they could choose to calm the disturbance, but that would also attract other monsters. Therefore, it would be wiser to leave the forest quickly. However, Gran didn't believe his words and grew irritated that the soldiers were beginning to follow Nox's orders instead of his own. Another soldier approached and asked Nox why he was stepping on the ground. It was because he knew that some monsters were known to emerge from below, which caused panic among the others. The boy looked down and confirmed it, explaining that they were crossing a particular kind of habitat. When everyone began to feel the ground tremble, Sakri grew frightened, and screams echoed around them. Nox announced that the worm was coming as he saw it emerge from the earth. The creature resembled a giant worm or a python, but such appearances hid the fact that it was actually a malformed dragon, one that couldn't use magic due to its condition. Nevertheless, it was still powerful. It wasn't uncommon for dozens of ogres to try fighting it, only to meet a collective end. This was also the reason Nox had been looking for such a monster, watching it devour a horse while the others had no idea that he had been stomping on the ground intentionally to lure it. The boy turned to the others and told them to hide in the bushes, which confused them. Nox smiled, remembering that he had told them the ogres wouldn't be a problem. In truth, that wasn't technically wrong. Even though sending the ogres away hadn't been part of his initial plan, he saw new swarms of them emerging from the forest. Zetri wore a worried expression, terrified by the legion of ogres. But Nox reassured her and asked if she knew which creatures a worm liked and hated the most. She looked confused before flinching at the thunderous rumble. Nox explained that the answer to both was the same: ogres. As the two species began to clash, the boy explained that ogres were the worm's favorite prey, but they were also far from being allies. Thus, an experienced adventurer should know how to turn such situations to their advantage. The worm roared and crushed one of the ogres, while the others swung their clubs at it. Everyone watched in shock as the two species tore each other apart. Gran clenched his teeth, wondering if Nox had predicted this outcome. Sakri asked if they should just wait, but Nox had other plans. The boy with violet-colored eyes observed the battle and began throwing small stones at the ogres, confusing Zachary as to how that could possibly help. As the ogres continued to die, the system notified Nox that his energy was increasing along with his lifespan, extended by 8 hours for every ogre defeated. It wasn't something he would explain to the green-haired maid, but he needed to improve his stats. Soon Nox realized that all the ogres were dead. Gran wondered what the plan was now since Nox couldn't face the worm alone. Then Nox stood up and ordered the soldiers to aim for the worm's mouth. There was hesitation at first, but they eventually followed his command. As the boy activated his time-slowing ability and charged forward, arrows and spears moved sluggishly through the air. Nox leaped and slashed the worm several times, spinning before landing gracefully. When the ability ended, the worm exploded in a burst of blood from his attacks. His lifespan increased by 10 days, more than expected, but he was pleased to see that large monsters benefited him so greatly, though it wouldn't have been as easy without the ogres. When Nox's stamina reached 5, his temporary trait expired, a side effect of using that scroll all that time ago. It was unfortunate, but at least he had managed to get this far. Nox clenched his fist as everyone stared at him, cheering for his skill. He was about to respond when more cracking and rumbling sounds erupted. Another worm burst from the ground. Nox was a little surprised by the presence of a second worm. However, he would soon. Nox was even more surprised when someone shouted for the others to get out of the way, as the worm was immediately cut down and killed by a new person. This person, wearing a monocle, was someone Nox recognized, and he wondered why she was there. Nox questioned what this monocled person was doing here, recognizing the character immediately. Everyone else also recognized who this person was and knew that they were a student of a man named Chelsis, the genius swordsman, the strongest unit in the universe, and one of the 3 supremes alongside Theodore. This man was called Paracelsus. The new man asked if the rules of nobility dictated that they should refrain from expressing gratitude when saved. Nox remembered that this was also the man who harbored great hatred toward the nobility. Schultz felt offended on Green's behalf, and asked if Paracelsus knew who Green was, but Paracelsus only gave a passive-aggressive reply. Paracelsus then introduced himself, saying he was a kind of mercenary. Nox recalled how it was expected that this man would despise nobles, given his background. More importantly, he wasn't supposed to appear in this scene until the Academy chapter began. In his previous life, Nox had played this game countless times, but Paracelsus had never appeared before the start of the academic year. The boy wondered what was happening, clenching his fist as he looked at Paracelsus and considered what he should do next. The sun began to set as the group rode across the terrain. Green tried to converse with the mercenary, asking if he was also heading to Chatters. Paracelsus confirmed and said he was going there to hunt monsters. That made Nox think. He remembered that Paracelsus was a man who traveled across various kingdoms of the empire to prepare before the start of the academic year. Thus, Nox wondered if the kingdom he traveled to each time was chosen randomly. Green noticed that Paracelsus was traveling alone, which showed the man's confidence in himself and his abilities. Then Green mentioned that he paid his men well and asked if Paracelsus would be interested in joining the campaign against the monster wave. Paracelsus looked at Nox's brother with a raised eyebrow, murmured as if thinking, then stepped away and said he was intrigued by the idea of working under the Lenhuber family. Nox watched from a distance as Schultz tried to defend and take offense on Green's behalf, but Green interrupted and waved his hand to stop him. Instead, he told Paracelsus to take his time and consider the offer carefully. Green had seen this man slay a worm with a single strike, so he wanted him under his command to regain the confidence of the soldiers that Nox had taken from him. The group finally arrived at their destination, which Nox announced to the others while looking ahead and noticing how much more desolate the place appeared in real life than in the game. They were allowed through the gate, and Green clicked his tongue as he saw rats running around, but his attention was quickly drawn to a girl weakly asking if he had any food to spare. Green looked at the girl with disgust and pulled his horse away from her, making her flinch in surprise. Nox also averted his gaze, which made the girl's expression wither as she lowered her head. Paracelsus looked at the girl and clicked his tongue as well. The group was stopped by a man who introduced himself as Tegan, greeting them and explaining that he was the captain of the city guard. He had already heard that Green was on his graduation mission and that Nox was there to provide support. He continued talking with the noble while Paracelsus commented that he might have deluded himself into thinking that the children of a supreme would somehow be different from other nobles, since they had been chosen to represent their family. When the mercenary had witnessed Nox fighting the worm, Nox hadn't seemed bad at swordsmanship, but Paracelsus still believed that the Liemhebbers were spoiled from start to finish. He looked around with disappointment, observing how disordered the city was. The townspeople clearly lacked the ability to withstand the upcoming monster wave, which made Paracelsus wonder if those who hadn't yet died of hunger were truly the lucky ones. As the sun was nearly set, it was decided that they would discuss everyone's duties the following day. Tigan led them to an inn where they could rest. Everyone dismounted their horses and began preparing for the night. Green looked toward Paracelsus, recalling the earlier proposal, which made him excited until Paracelsus refused the offer without hesitation. Green frowned in confusion and asked if Paracelsus knew what he was saying, wondering if the man with the monocle intended to face the monster wave alone. Nox watched from afar as Paracelsus explained that his intention was to proceed with his original plan, but that he wished Green good luck. Green called Paracelsus a commoner, but this only made the mercenary laugh, as he had already been the target of much crueler insults, such as vagabond. Even so, Paracelsus still wished Green good luck in overcoming the challenges ahead. Nox then believed that this was the end of their interaction and wondered if their paths would ever cross again. The night arrived, and Nox told Zitter to rest well as they would be busy the next day. He went to his room only to notice that the girl from earlier was outside sitting near a campfire with other children. The girl flinched in surprise when her attention was drawn to Nox, who asked if she was still looking for food. All the children looked at Nox in shock as he pulled out a bag full of bread. He handed the loaves to them, making the girl cry with happiness. Nox knew he couldn't save everyone, and this action was simply him acting out of the small bit of goodwill that his otherworldly self used to have. Still, the children were overjoyed by this kind gesture as they ate their food, something Nox hoped they would never have to beg for again. Moreover, Nox and the others still needed to find ways to survive in this city. In the distance, it seemed that Zitri was watching what Nox was doing, smiling softly at the fact that the boy who had acted cold earlier was showing compassion now. The next day, Tegan explained to the others how, every year, the southern region of Cheras was frequently ravaged by waves of monsters. In their efforts to fend them off, the city had no one to rely on except the king's subsidies and support. As they passed through the area, Green asked if the palisade served as the city's only defense, to which Tegan confirmed. Although everything needed repairs, Nox looked at the walls and sighed, knowing that the entire city would be massacred within an hour once the waves began to advance. This campaign was merely a sub-episode in the game. In the game, Nox could choose whether or not to save the city, but so far he had always chosen to save it. Why, you ask? Because the city later became extremely valuable as Ched eventually turned into one of the most profitable lands in the empire. Tegan continued speaking with the young nobles, explaining that this year monsters were proliferating at an alarming rate, something never seen before. Nox realized that these people had no idea how this unusual increase would one day benefit this land, but that was something for the future to reveal. There were reports from townsfolk claiming to have sighted a griffin, which made everyone freeze as Green muttered thoughtfully, asking where it had been seen. Blocking the advance of that griffin was crucial to the campaign's success, as such creatures were known as the kings of the desert, and in the game they were meant to be driven away, not hunted. Despite that, Nox's plan was to hunt it. Everyone looked toward the desert as Tegan explained that it was a neutral territory serving as the border with Tahalan. Nox finally spoke, wondering if no one else was curious, since the griffin's known habitats did not even border the cities of Cheddars. He then asked whether they were not usually found in Tahalan, questioning why one would appear so close to Ched in the first place. A cold silence fell over the men as Nox realized their reaction answered his question. It revealed who the traitor was and marked the beginning of a submission. The first thing Nox planned to do was eliminate the infectious rot spreading within the city. Later, Scholz was seen crumpling papers in anger, feeling that Nox had begun to become a major obstacle to his plans. Nox's maneuvering had caused Scholz to lose Green's favor. He gnashed his teeth in rage, knowing he had wasted all his time flattering Green to earn his trust. But his angry thoughts were interrupted when he heard Zitri coming down the stairs of the inn. Schultz remembered that the girl was Knox's servant, a commoner. He immediately formed a plan. He slammed his hand against the wall beside her, grabbed her arm and pulled her close, leaving her confused and asking what he intended to do. The man said it was obvious and that they should find a place to talk, but Zitri pulled her hand away and tried to back off. However, Schultz continued his advances, saying that as a knight on a mission he still needed some entertainment, and asked Zitra if she didn't feel the same. He grabbed her shoulder and the green-haired girl was about to respond, but realized that fighting back would put Knox on the wrong side of Green, exposing him to contempt and scorn from his entire family. So she decided to let things happen in hopes of protecting Knox. Schultz sneered, and said that, as Knox's servant, she should pay the price for Knox's actions. However, Knox's voice was heard as he calmly said that he was more than willing to pay the price himself. The sound of slashes echoed, and Zitri looked up in shock to see Knox holding a bloodied blade. The boy glared coldly at Schultz, telling him to name the price he wanted Knox to pay for his failed efforts. The man, confused and in pain, shouted that Knox wouldn't get away with mutilating one of Green's knights. But Knox didn't care. He slashed again, severing Schultz's other arm, making him scream even louder in agony. Schultz asked if Knox thought he could hide behind his family name, but his words were cut short as Knox coldly replied that it was Schultz himself who had been hiding behind the names of Aliyah and Lenhaber. The man's final moments were spent staring at Knox's blade, before it descended once more. Knox's blade was driven into Schultz's back, killing him instantly. Zitra was worried about what would happen to Knox because of his actions, but the answer came soon enough when Green entered the inn and asked if he had killed Schultz. The boy immediately admitted it, which made Green yell at his brother, but Knox calmly asked whether it was fair to shout before even asking what had happened. Green grabbed Knox by the collar and demanded an explanation, threatening him. Knox gave a simple answer. Schultz had tried to violate his servant, and he refused to stand by and let that happen. This response did not satisfy Green, but Knox asked if his brother was truly certain of his priorities, releasing a surge of power from his body to intimidate him. Green was stunned by the sight of what Knox was capable of, unable to believe the power his younger brother now possessed compared to before. Green said that Knox could have at least reported it to him first, but Knox interrupted, reminding him that he was known as the black sheep of the family, and that reporting and waiting were never his strong suits. With that, Knox suggested postponing the judgment and letting their father make the final decision. Green swallowed nervously and reluctantly agreed, making Knox smile before telling Zitri it was time to go. After they left promptly, the older brother stood there, wondering how long Knox had been like this and why the sword he wielded seemed so familiar, but Green knew now that he should no longer underestimate the boy. Knox also knew that there would now be unrest among the soldiers, who were divided into factions and stood at a crossroads, wondering whether to follow Green or Knox. He looked at Zitra and asked if she was all right, but she asked him the same question back, wondering why he had protected her when it might only make things worse. Knox asked the green-haired girl if she knew what kind of person the master she served truly was, reminding her that he was the useless one of the Lenhaber family. He told her that no matter where they were, she should never lower her head, and she was moved by his words, nodding in agreement. Meanwhile, back at the inn, Green slammed his mug on the table in frustration, realizing that Knox had gone from being a troublesome burden to a completely different person. He was also troubled by how the sword Knox carried looked so much like their father's blade. Green decided he needed to be cautious around the boy, especially now that Schultz was gone. His thoughts were interrupted when another man entered the room to report that the mess had been taken care of. The man also agreed that Knox was very different from the rumors, and Green couldn't help but think that the man himself seemed different too. He was supposed to be the captain of the night order operating in the area, yet he acted strangely familiar with Knox. Since the monster wave hadn't started yet, Green decided to rely more on the night order, instructing the man to eliminate all nearby bandits and monsters, and to report immediately if anything happened to Knox. The man agreed and left at once. Outside, Knox was with Zitra, inspecting a few vials. When Zitre asked if he had looked around the city walls, he said he had. The green-haired girl then asked how they planned to stop the coming wave, to which Nox replied that he was thinking of recruiting someone new, because he knew there was a genius in this small village. A woman named Alina, a character Nox had recruited every time he came to Chaders. She was a talented potion maker and served as Nox's potion supplier in the game. As they walked through the alleys, Zitre asked if such a brilliant alchemist really existed in a place like this. Nox confirmed it and explained that she had her own reasons for staying here, this being the hidden route to clear Chaders. In the future, Alina would work for someone else instead of the Ark Empire. Therefore, unless someone completed Chaders through the hidden route, they could never recruit Alina. They continued walking as if Nox already knew where to go. Zitre noticed a light pointed toward it and entered the building, where they found a drunken woman staring at them. Nox greeted her. The woman shouted in surprise at the sight of other people, and Zitre was shocked that the supposed genius potion maker was a drunkard. After calming down a bit, Alina apologized for her behavior and Nox told her they needed to talk. Nox thought about Alina's character at this point in the story. He had to recruit her into the party despite her flaws. Reading her stats, he saw that her only negative trait was her drinking habit. He sighed, knowing that the Lenabar family would probably never recruit someone so unrefined, but he told Zitre they had no choice. Zitre tried to argue that it wasn't wise to recruit a drunk and Nox agreed but said the situation was complicated. Alina asked why they had come, and Nox got straight to the point. He wanted her to join his team in exchange for giving her what she most desired. She didn't understand what he meant and tried to refuse, but Nox knew her reasons were tied to May, surprising her with his knowledge. Nox immediately explained that May would soon be executed, shocking the woman even further. Nox said